Good morning and welcome to the middle of June. I'll fairly straightforward forecast here. We've had a little bit of a pattern change, at least for a week, but I think as we look overall at the outlook, we have a bit more of the same coming up, unfortunately, and I'll talk about that here in just a moment. But looking at the week in review real quickly, for a change, it was cooler than normal. On the left-hand side here, mean temperature departures, and you can see some areas of the state actually 4 or 5 degrees Fahrenheit below normal. We had a big trough, actually a couple of them, over the Great Lakes region, and northwesterly flow resulted in a cooler than normal week, and you can see much of the eastern Corn Belt and off into the mid-Atlantic under the same type of influence. More importantly here, especially given our situation this spring and early summer, precipitation-wise, on Sunday, as most all know, and we're watching their rain gauges, we had the first rain in many days. Some parts of the state actually were approaching 4 weeks without precipitation, which is very unusual. Climatologically here in Michigan, when the rain came, it varied. It was not enough, of course, to change the long-term situation, but whatever we get, we certainly appreciate. You can see totals here. The highest totals we had, half to some 1-inch totals across the far south, the eastern lower portions of central lower Michigan, and then central and eastern upper Michigan. That contrasted with areas of the south central lower and the northern lower, where we saw less, generally 1/4 to 1/2 inch or less than that. Again, all of those are still below normal, but again, and given how long it had been without precipitation, everything is important these days, and we'll pay attention to that as we move into the forecast. This is not that it's a surprise, but short-term drought index here from the drought center in Lincoln, Nebraska, and it has expanded significantly here over the last couple of weeks. And I guess one of the points is that Michigan is lots of reds and browns. That's not good, of course, and we've got moderate, severe, or even worse short-term drought in place here. But the other point is that we are not alone, and much of the Midwest, certainly the Corn Belt, and then eastward into the Mid-Atlantic and even New England, under the same influence of a unusually dry pattern. And I think this is a classic, given that most of you know, as we've talked about this as it unfolded, we went from a situation with above normal precipitation for much of the late winter and into the early spring to the exact opposite, or almost an extreme. And so this would almost be the definition of a flash drought, where we see a rapid transition from one state to another. That definitely has happened this year, but it also sets us apart and makes it different from some very impactful drought events in the past, such as 1988 or 2012, in which we came into the growing season significantly drier than normal. So there's still moisture at depth if you search for it. It's getting deeper, and there's less of it now than there was before, but there's still some there because of that. I wanted to show one quick image here from EnviroWeather. This is from our weather station at Hazlitt, which is located on a very well-drained, coarse-textured soil sphinx. I know many of you are familiar with that, especially if you're from the southern part of the state. But this is a soil, again, that does not hold much water. But I just wanted to show from the network what some of the measurements indicate for the top 20 inches of the soil profile. We've got volumetric soil here on a daily basis at 4, 8, and 20 inches. Those are the three red, purple lines here. And then I've also put the daily precipitation totals. That's on the right-hand side axis here. And it goes back to the beginning of April. This goes up through Sunday, including the rain, about 0.2 of an inch is what we had here locally in the local area. But you can see very relatively high values then coming out of that wetter than normal, and then a gradual drawdown in the moisture here in the topsoil. I'm sure everybody appreciates this and has seen this in their own setting. Remember that this is a very well-drained soil. But I think the point here is that and I also have two horizontal lines on here, one at about 0.15 or 15%. That's the rough field capacity of this particular soil. Again, it varies a little bit by horizon in the soil. And then about 0.05 or 5% is where we see our wilting point for this soil. So it's a little bit of a relative term, but the point is that by late May, in all of this top 20, we see values down at or below wilting point. It is really, really dry. And currently we're running 1 or 2%. That's it in terms of volumetric water. And that's even for this kind of a very dry soil, that's a really, really low level. And we're still there. I noticed after the 0.2 of an inch on Sunday that we had, it barely made it. The wetting front of that water really made it down to about 4 inches, and that was it. So it did help with a temporary reduction in some stress or level, I'm sure, for the surface, but a lot more is needed to make a major change. And again, if you dig and you go down deeper, there's still water there, but you just have to go down deeper than you did before. So it's some observations to confirm, of course, what everybody has suspected and knows is happening. Now, where are we going in the forecast here? Well, I mentioned a little bit of a respite in our pattern, and that's what we've seen here over the last several days. That is going to continue at least one more day. We've got a weather system currently moving through the state. It's actually two weather systems. There's a cold front you can see here on the weather map at 8 o'clock. That's pushing south. There's a Canadian air mass to the north of this up in northern Ontario. And then there's a little, you can see the red L here, a small area of low pressure that's going to ride along that frontal system here over the next several hours. That's going to set off, be our best chance for precip in the coming week. I think that's the bottom line with this one. And we will see scattered showers and a few thunderstorms here today. There's really two rounds. One of them is occurring right now down in the lower left-hand this side here. This is a recent radar, and we've got generally some light rain up in northern parts of the state, the eastern upper and portions of the northern lower. That's moving in that whole area to the southeast. It'll clip parts of the thumb here a little bit over the next couple of hours, but it'll probably be dissipating as the day goes on into the late morning, into the middle of the day. And then a second round of precipitation is expected to develop here, probably across the central lower peninsula as that front moves southward, and set up the stage for probably some thunderstorms actually. And as it's looking, as things have come together here, the timing of the day, by the mid-afternoon, we should see the radar blossom again with activity. Right now, it looks primarily like the eastern portions, east central, southeastern lower Michigan is where we're going to see that probably have the greatest chances. And here's the map. This is for 2 p.m. this afternoon. You can see a dark green here in the southeastern corner. That's where we're going to see the best chance for thunderstorms. Some of those actually could be strong with maybe with a little bit of hail or some strong winds. I have to keep an eye on. I think most of the severe weather with this, if it occurs, probably will be south of Michigan, but the southeast corner of the state could see some of that. But again, in the big picture, more importantly, there will be water, there will be rain here, and some spots here probably going to maybe see a half an inch. It's going to drop off the precip totals certainly as you go westward from that area of the state. So I think, unfortunately, western parts of the state will see relatively little or no precipitation with this system as it goes through. Here's the weather map tomorrow morning. Everything clears the state by tonight. So really the threat for any rain ends this evening. And then the high pressure settles in here for the next several days and really into next week. Now, it will be temporarily a little bit cooler with the air mass here. One other thing of note here, and it's been a crazy year for this particular air mass, even though it's a nice Canadian air mass from the high latitudes, it's going to bring down more of the smoke and the haze from some of the Canadian forest fires. So we will be dealing with that over the next several days as well. So don't be surprised to see it look hazy, because that's, again, we're just the gift that keeps giving this year, with all of the smoke transported southward into especially the northern part of the U.S. And that's likely going to be the case here for the next couple of days into the weekend. By Saturday, more of the same, high pressure over the region. We will see fair dry conditions as a rule here, but we will see a warming trend. And so by Friday, we'll be back up, our high temperatures back up into the mid upper 70s. We'll be into the low 80s by the weekend, and then probably mid 80s for high temperatures by next week. Min temps warming from the upper 40s, low 50s, well into the 50s here by late in the week. And so look for, after today, again, the really the best chance for rain in the week for a fair dry pattern. We may see a few isolated showers late Sunday and into early next week across portions of the state. And I almost don't even want to put it in the forecast, but there is a chance. But if it does occur right now, it looks like it would be very, very spotty or isolated at best. So most areas are looking after today at a very, very dry forecast for the bulk of the upcoming week. Precip totals through the next 7 days through next Wednesday evening. You can see the from this map, from this chart, the best chances again across eastern lower Michigan. A couple areas maybe seeing 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch, and then decreasing rapidly as you go west from there to less than 1/10 of an inch in the western part of the state. So once again, for most of the state, we are unfortunately looking at a drier than normal week. With increasing temperatures and relatively dry air, low humidities, we are going to be looking at, especially after the last couple of days of relatively cool conditions, we're going to see an increase in potential evapotranspiration rates. Once again, they're not going to be quite as extreme as they were in portions of May and into early June here this season, but they are going to be above 0.2 of an inch per day in most spots, except if you're right along the lake shore. So look for elevated rates of water demand once again, especially as we move into the weekend and into early next week. And then really importantly, and this is probably one of the focus, really the focus of our outlook, what's happening in the medium range. Well, and I wish I had a little bit more encouraging news, but look at this jet stream pattern here on the left-hand side here. One of the things, it very, very amplified big ridges and big troughs across the hemisphere. That has been a hallmark of the last several months here in Michigan, and it continues to this time. We would typically expect to see less of that as we move into the summer stable season, but our medium range suggests here a big trough out over, let me go back to that, a big trough out over the western portion of North America, and then a big ridge. But note here, you've got a split flow, a big ridge in the northern part of the flow, and then a trough. And if you've been watching these maps, you know that's not the first time we've seen that. We've seen that before a couple times. And this is a blocking feature in the atmosphere. And by virtue of its name, you can imagine what that deals with. And that's basically looking at relatively stable patterns, and they're not stable in a good way for us, because underneath that ridge, we are very, very highly, the strong likelihood of warmer than normal temperatures. And you can see that here for the 6 to 10 day outlook. 8 to 14 is the same way. And at the same time, we basically just don't get much moisture here. A lot of easterly flow at low levels. It's hard to get water vapor, hard to get moisture here. And as a result of that, also normal to below normal precipitation totals. So right now, for much of the last part of June and possibly into early July, where the medium range is fairly consistent and suggesting warmer and probably drier, unfortunately, than normal conditions. So we haven't seen the last of this pattern. We're looking for a change or some kind of a break in that, but based on the guidance right now, we're probably dealing with another 1 to 2 weeks of this same pattern. New long lead outlook ensemble is released here shortly. The next hour or two, we'll be looking at that for next week and be paying a lot of attention, especially for the month of July. But right now, the medium range suggests we're going to go back to a little bit where we were in late May and early June. So summarizing, rain possible here today. Hopefully that'll visit your particular location. It won't be totally widespread and uniform, but many areas will hopefully pick up some much needed moisture, or maybe 1/2 inch or better, especially in the east. And then we turn dry by tomorrow, and then continuing through the weekend into next week with a warming trend, as we mentioned. And that is also our direction here for our medium range forecast guidance. And as I said, next week we'll be looking longer than that. Some of you probably heard that we've officially now are in an El Nino event. Developed in the equatorial Pacific here during the month of May. It came more rapidly or more quickly than expected. I'll talk a little bit about that next week. And it probably doesn't have much of an impact on us here, at least not yet, but it could later. And it also was a little bit of a surprise in terms of how rapidly it did evolve. So that's something we'll keep an eye on. But the important thing is we will have some new outlooks to look at in the longer term. And with that, I'll wrap up and introduce next week's speaker, and that's Dr. Marty Chilvers, who will be with us next Thursday, the 22nd, and he's going to be talking about white mold management and soybeans. And so with that, I'll turn it back to Steve and Phil to talk about credits.